For the delay. So, first item on the agenda today is apologies.
We also have apologies for Paul Stone. Thank you.
Any more apologies? Okay, thanks. Item 2 on this agenda is late items to be introduced by the chair. There is one late item, which we'll deal with as item 5 on the agenda, or after item 4 on the agenda. So moving on for now, are there any declarations of interest? Thank you. Item number 4 on the agenda then are the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 26th of July, of which you should have had a copy. Anyone second that? Thank you. We've rattled through that quickly that I would need to introduce the late item now. We have one late item that I've accepted onto the Council's annual government statement. The reason that it was brought to as a late item to this report was not available at the point the agenda was published. It's important that the Audit and Governance Committee review the annual governance statement, and the committee's next meeting is not until December. The report will be heard in today's meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm obviously pleased to present the annual governance statement for 22-23. I don't intend to go through the report in any detail, Chair. What I will say is the AGS is a really, really important document within the scope of the Council's overall governance arrangements. It sets out the systems, procedures and process that the Council has in place to ensure that its decision making is sound, lawful and offers taxpayers value for money. And it's a framework, it sits within the framework of the Council's decision making process and looks at how the Council comes to make its decisions, ensuring that they are open and transparent, ensure that its services deliver value for money, and ensuring that the Council acts in accordance with due process. There's a lot of work that's gone into this, and it also obviously talks about how the Council's performed in a very difficult set of circumstances, as everybody I'm sure will be well aware. And it also sets out the roles and responsibilities of senior officers within the Council, notably the Council's Section 151 officer, monitoring officer and head of internal audit. And also includes the head of internal audit assessment of the overall control framework, which is set out in the report. So it's an important annual report, Chair, which I'm not, as I say, I don't intend to go into any detail, but I think what it does say is that the Council governance arrangements are sound. And certainly recent history has shown that some local authorities, it's been issues of a breakdown in governance that has led to some of the failures that we've seen recently in the local government sector. And I think it's safe to say that Derby's governance arrangements, as assessed by our annual governance statement, are very sound. Happy to take any questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Whilst obviously this, as the Chief Executive has outlined, is the most important document to us here this morning, the contents of which are outlined to us. But what I want to ask the Chief Executive is, what does he think are the main risks to the Council over the coming year?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I guess I would say that there are two. The first is, I think, self-evident. It's the financial situation facing all local authorities. We've got the medium-term financial strategy report going to Cabinet this afternoon, and that report sets out, I think, very clearly the challenge facing the local government sector, which I think the wording is they're probably the most perilous that it's ever been. So I think that's probably a glowing red risk, and I don't think anybody would be surprised to hear me say that. I think I've said publicly that this local authority is not in imminent danger of issuing a Section 114 notice, as we've seen recently that many local authorities have done. But that is also not to detract from the fact that our financial challenge is very, very serious. So that would be the first. The second, I would say, is, and I guess it's not unrelated, but the second is workforce. I think, again, I'm not saying this is necessarily just unique to Derby, because it absolutely isn't. But it is becoming difficult to recruit to certain posts. People can get jobs elsewhere, particularly in the care sector. It's difficult to recruit to some of our posts and of course we've got real issues around capacity in the organisation because of our financial challenge. So the two things do go together. So I think there's something about, and I was at a meeting in London yesterday with DLUC officials, and workforce was one of the things that we talked about. You know, where do the future chief execs for local government come from? And this isn't just about chief executives, of course, but I'm just saying that to make the point. It's who would want these jobs, because they're incredibly difficult and in really, really challenging circumstances. So I think the two things probably are those two, the financial situation and workforce, would be the two most pressing challenges, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sutherland.
Just a couple of things, really. There's one or two detailed bits and pieces. Well, I don't want to go into odd bits of things. I think, to a certain extent, in a couple of areas, you slightly understate what you want to say, because, for instance, on the bit about evaluation of effectiveness on page 5, you talk about work of councillors and so on. You have actually got co-opted members added onto this committee, which a lot of places don't. You know, most places don't. And you know, whether I've added value or we've added value, I'll leave that to your decision. But you know, it is a fact we are in place, and in many respects, where there has been criticism of government arrangements in other places, that has not happened and has been introduced as a result. So you could actually mention it, you know, as a side thing. But yeah. The other thing that concerns me as well is that coming on to page 7, that first section, evaluation of effectiveness, you talk about comments made by external auditors. Well, we haven't actually had any comments from external auditors for some considerable time about anything, well, about the accounts, about the value for money, about arrangements, or anything like that at all. So I'm not quite sure how you can say that, Paul, because we haven't actually had anything to say, or they haven't actually said anything to us. Whether we ought to mention that in the report, I don't know. Any comments? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, well, I'll deal with each of those in turn. So your first comment, you've said far better than I would have done, so thank you. You're absolutely right. I would agree with your assessment. In terms of having co-opted members, I think that's a very forward-thinking thing that this council has done, probably ahead of its time. So, there's no doubt that co-opted members are absolutely adding value. So I think that is a strength that we can point to. It wasn't a case of downplaying it. I'd give you the opportunity to say it for yourself. So thank you. The second point in terms of the external auditors, yes. I mean, obviously we do have conversations with our external auditors. I would absolutely agree with your point that formally they haven't said anything, but we clearly are in conversation, regular conversation with our external auditors in terms of, unfortunately, a lot of those conversations haven't been particularly positive, sadly, over recent times. I think the committee is well aware that we are coming to the end of the current arrangements with our existing external auditors. There will be a change next year, which I'm sure, like me and like Alison and Richard, that we welcome that change. Sadly, again, the situation regarding external audit is not unique to Derby. There are, I think, something like 500 audits awaiting sign-off by external auditors across the country. And that is an issue that the government has acknowledged and recognised and is trying to deal with and addressing that backlog. But it's going to take some time. But I think the comment is there really on the basis that it's not just necessarily formal comments that are made to the committee, but conversations that we have with our external auditors on a relatively regular basis.
But we can't actually point to anything that says your arrangements are good, your arrangements are bad, your arrangements are okay. We can't actually point to anything at this point in time, can we? Other than conversations you've had, or Alison's had with the external audit partners. So there's nothing concrete in the way of reports. I'm not saying it's your fault, because actually it isn't your fault. Well, I hope not. It's something for external audit. And obviously we have somebody here today who can comment on that later on, but that's just my concern, that there isn't anything available at this point in time we can point to. So it is a gap in the arrangements, and it is quite a serious gap. Even this morning they've said that there are only 5 audits have been signed off for the last year out of 900 in the whole country, and this is by the closing date when they should be signed off, which is quite clearly absolutely ridiculous. And it's not, as you say, it's not just a Derby thing; it's the whole country thing. And I would say that, wouldn't I? But since they got rid of the audit commission, the whole place has gone to pot. But I have to declare an interest, obviously, having been employed by them at the time. But anyway, I'll leave that with you.
Thank you. Councillor Rapton, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask the question. The City Council's reserves were raided continuously by the previous administration over a number of years. So I'd like to ask what the current level of reserves are. How worried are we about the low level of reserves, and how will this impact on the hopes and aspirations that the new administration have as we move forward? Thank you.
Can I just remind all members before we do that Audit and Governance is not a party political committee. We work together for the interests of all of the members.
Mr. Chair, the two do actually collide, and it's important that we speak truth to both the past and the present, and sometimes we have to ask these robust questions.
In that case, comments like that need to be substantiated in future.
I think the evidence that is there to substantiate them quite firmly. Thank you.
This is an annual government statement in relation to financial year 22-23. So I think Councillor Reptons is talking more recently about reserves at the current position. But I can answer that question. It's public information. As reported in our Q1 outturn position, our budget risk reserves were around about £3 million, and our general fund reserves are at 8.9 million.
Yes, Councillor Mulhall.
Cheers, Chair. Thank you very much. So my question is to yourself, Paul. Councillor Bolton asked around the key risks that the council is currently facing at the moment. So my question is kind of the opposite. What opportunities do you envision the council has going forward for the next couple of years?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the council will continue as best it can to do what the council does well, which is serve the people and the businesses of this city. We've got good services. This is a well-managed organisation. We've got outstanding children's social care. We're one of only 3 cities in the country to have that accolade. We've done some really good stuff in terms of the regeneration of the city, creating jobs. And so we've got some challenges ahead in terms of bringing our city centre back to life, which we're clearly working on. So there's lots and lots of things that we can look forward to. Clearly subject to the legislation being passed and subject to this council giving the go-ahead and the other 3 councils. We've also got the combined authority, which I think will evidently should bring extra investment to the East Midlands. I think everybody in this room would agree that the East Midlands has fallen behind other parts of the country in terms of public sector investment, and our hope and expectation is that the combined authority will begin to address that shortfall, and ideally, obviously, some of those additional resources come to Derby. So I think there are lots and lots of opportunities. But it is against that backdrop of the financial challenge, and I guess my response is if that financial challenge wasn't there, think of all the other things that we could be doing, I guess, is my response to that, because our opportunities as a city and as a city council, we've demonstrated that we can deliver, we've demonstrated that we can do things well, and without that financial challenge, I'm sure we could do a damn sight more. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back and thank Paul for his answer to my initial question, but just to complete the circle, I mean, clearly what he said to us was no surprise, in that the financial situation we know, and not only with this council but other councils throughout the country, however they are run and whichever political party is in control. And obviously the workforce and recruitment issue, obviously whilst I was the cabinet member for CYP, I saw myself the issues within the social care system for particularly our children in care who don't have a consistent social worker, etc., and the effects that has on the children's well-being and development. But just as an aside, really, and not particularly for now, but I just want to put it on record, I clearly listened to what Paul said regarding the two risks and the pressures, the financial and recruitment. Not for this committee now, but clearly there needs to be an action plan and a way forward to try and tackle both issues. I know resources is an issue, but I think as an authority we need to have a plan in place to counteract the issues that Paul said and to try and ease the situation within, I know, particularly CYP and the social care element. I don't need an answer now, Chair. I'm just raising it as an issue of concern that I'm sure Paul and the relevant cabinet members will deal with. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, indeed an area of concern to take away and perhaps report back to the future committee. I've noted your interest. Councillor Wright.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, and I do think it's important to give a balance in terms of the budget moving forward, that there's always opportunity. Budgets are all about how you decide to spend your money, and I've got no doubt this administration will decide to spend their money in separate ways. So I recognise the Chief Executive's recognition that of all the success that's happened over the past few years in terms of inward investment, etc. My question really is about risk again, in terms of, you know, it's extremely concerning what's happening in Birmingham, for example, and particularly the issue around equal pay issues. I just want to confirm that there's no such issues that relate to Derby City Council.
No.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'm not being flippant. I'm simply saying that just because there's not a lot else I can say, but I can confirm that is not the case.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
No, it's fine. Tony Norman, one of the new co-opted members. So good to meet
You have
people.
a question?
You might find this from after Philip, this one doesn't add any value, but apologies in advance if that's the case. 2 quick points. On page 21 of the report, when we talk about senior management assurance statements, there were 15 statements done. It said most of these evidenced full compliance with the principles of good governance. I just wanted to check whether we should be concerned that it's only most and not all, and are there any risks that it is only most of the statements that evidence good practice?
Thank you for the question. I guess the response to that is no organisation is risk-free. Risk is something that, from my perspective, you take measures to tolerate and manage and mitigate as best you can. There's no set of circumstances where an operational environment is going to be completely free of risk. And so directors have to operate within a framework, both legal and financial, and they make judgments day in, day out. And if you look at situations that local authority officers have to deal with every day, and just mentioned there about children's social care, you know, officers and senior leaders will be taking really, really difficult decisions every single day, and what we've got to be confident about is that our assurance framework provides as much mitigation as possible within the frameworks that we operate within and the activities that a local authority is involved in. That isn't a risk-free environment, and actually I think what we do is manage those risks really, really well, but you're never going to be risk-free.
No, that's fine. I think there's a difference between risk management and governance, but that's cool. The only other point was on page 18 regarding data protection, where there's been a 50% increase in data breaches in that year, and whether that's a concern to this committee or a concern to the executive.
Yeah, thank you. You're absolutely right, and that is something that we are looking at. And actually, we've actually changed the senior management arrangements around governance in that part of the business, and we've moved it now under our head of legal services, who is tasked with ensuring that wherever possible we can mitigate the number of data breaches that are coming forward. I think there is an issue about probably the need for more training and more focus by officers, but again, and I'm not saying this is entirely why, but clearly where there are reductions in capacity, then there may well be increases in things like data breaches. So it's something that, again, we've got to manage. It may well be something that the committee wants to have a deeper look at, and maybe that's something that, you know, I'd certainly be happy to bring back, because it is something that we are concerned about at senior level. Don't think that it isn't. But as my understanding is that that's now been moved under our head of legal services, who is looking at the overall arrangements around the management of data and what we can do to ensure that we try and get on top of this and reduce the number of data breaches going forward.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I do actually think it would be appropriate for more information, a report, first of all on the structural change, and second of all on the plan to tackle the increase, with some aggregated information and more detailed information about what the breaches, the nature of the breaches, clearly without giving too much information.
Very happy to do that, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any more questions, Mr. Sunderland?
Just a quick one. I noticed that you've got this afternoon. You've got the medium-term financial plan going to report, which obviously updates the position for this current year, and will provide all the current information that Councillor Bolton was after, I imagine. Does this committee have any role to play in examining the way in which that's put together, the way in which it's presented, comments about it? Should this committee have any part in that position? I'm not sure. It's an open question. Because if you look on the committee functions, it talks about risk management and effectiveness of financial management arrangements and things like that, which quite clearly is quite key to the whole organisation, and that's exactly the nub of what Alison's report this afternoon is all about, isn't it? So that was just a thought. It's an open question. I've no agenda on it.
I think if it's all right, Mr. Sunderland, what we'll do is we'll take your question offline. I'll have a conversation after committee, and we'll decide whether or not that falls within the committee's remit.
I'm happy to respond, Chair, if it will help. And I think it's a very valid question, and I think the simple answer is yes. And the reasons I say that are twofold. So firstly, the committee, through Richard and his team, does have a role and responsibility for ensuring that the council's systems and processes for preparing its medium-term financial strategy are sound and robust, and Richard and his team test that on a regular basis. And no doubt that in the archive somewhere there will be a report on Richard's assessment of the robustness or otherwise of the council's planning assumptions and all the things that Alison and her team undertake to produce the medium-term financial strategy. So that's one thing. The second thing, which you've already alluded to, which sadly isn't as effective as we would all like at the moment, is of course the external auditor's view of the council's financial management arrangements and their assessment around things like value for money, etc. So those two things are very evidently within the remit of this committee. So and through those things, the audit committee very clearly has a role to ensure that the council's financial management arrangements are robust. And I would finish by saying, in my view, and I think in the view of Richard and his team, they are.
Thank you. Nice to have instant clarity. Richard, do we have scope to include that in the plan?
Yes, Chair, there's always scope to include that. We looked at it a few years ago, and it's due sometime in the next year or so, I'd imagine.
Thank you very much. We do have a representative from External Audit. Would you like to respond to the report?
Sure. Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the question. On the report, I would like to give a response in two parts. One, you would have, as Paul mentioned, there is an ongoing conversation from Ministry regarding the backlog in the audit process, and we are awaiting for a guidance from Ministry on that. So, second, on 2021 audit, we are almost through, but while doing 2022 audit, we came to a new information regarding a subsidiary auditor that they are providing some tax services to the subsidiary. And as per the NOA regulations, we cannot rely on the subsidiary auditor because they are not independent, and we have to perform independent procedures on the subsidiary. So that is the main chunk of work which is pending for 2021 audit. And pending report from or pending guidance from Ministry and DLUC, we are not being able to progress there. We are hoping we'll get something. Something was expected by end of September or early October, but we haven't received any guidance so far. As soon as we receive the guidance, we will work with management to complete 2021 as well as 2022, both the audits, and give our comment on BFM as well, same time.
Okay, thanks for the update. So, yeah, I understand then that we're waiting from advice from central government on how to approach this, and there's a potential, just so that everybody's clear, that 2021 to 22, 22 to 23 may well be risk accepted, for want of a better way of describing it, and so that we can all move on. And that's not just Derby, that's a much wider issue. So bearing that in mind, does anybody have any queries, either for the officers or for the external auditor? Mr. Sunderland?
Yeah, just on the, what's this about can't rely on other auditors? Who are they and why can't we? And who are they and what are we waiting for?
Sorry, can you please repeat?
Sorry, you mentioned that you can't rely on information from other auditors relating to 21, 22.
Yeah.
So who are they and what is the issue?
Okay. So it's not only for 21, 22, it's for 2021 as well. We need to provide an opinion on the group audit as well. And to provide opinion on group audit, in prior years, we were relying on the work performed by the statutory auditor of a subsidiary. But we got to know in current year that subsidiary auditor is providing some tax services to subsidiary Derby Home. And as per NOA guidance, that is a prohibited services. Hence, we cannot rely on the work performed by subsidiary auditor on Derby Homes, and we have to perform procedures ourselves on Derby Homes as well, along with the council.
So you can't rely on the audit of Derby Homes?
Right, that's
Derby
right.
Homes has been signed off for 2021, 21-2 and so on, has
Yes.
it? Do we know?
The issue is that it was performed by a different auditor, of which they won't accept the response.
Why not?
I don't.
As I mentioned, because they are providing some tax services which is prohibited as per NOA guidance, under which regulation we provide, we give our assurance.
That's how I understand the response. What's the next step then to approach that stalemate?
Okay, so till the year they are providing tax services, we have to perform procedures on Derby Homes ourselves instead of relying on their report. Yes.
Yes, and the way that I understand it is that that's work that goes into the backlog that already exists. Councillor Kerr?
Is there
Is Derby Homes causing some sort of delay for this work being done? Because if so, we need to facilitate that and ensure that you're given the access that you need to be able to complete the work, because otherwise we're stuck on that.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the issue isn't relating directly to Derby Homes. The issue is relating to an audit that was carried out on Derby Homes on behalf of the council.
But if the work that was done by the auditors on Derby Homes isn't adequate and has to be redone by themselves.
No, so we are not saying work done by Derby Home is inadequate. We are saying we just cannot rely on the work done on Derby Homes by their auditor because they are not independent as per NAO guidance. Hence, we have to perform procedures ourselves on Derby Home to provide assurance on group.
So I wonder if Councillor Kerr's question is related to the cooperation of Derby Homes. Are they forthcoming with the information that you require to move forward?
We haven't started procedure on Derby Home yet because we are awaiting for a guidance from a ministry on clearing this backlogs. We are hoping there might be some relaxation. Until that guidance is issued, we have paused our audit for both the years.
Would you like to respond?
I just come in there, Councillor Kerr, just to assure you from the Derby Homes aspect, in terms of the additional sampling for the 21-22, they've been fully compliant in terms of the additional work that EY have required, so there's absolutely no issue in terms of Derby Homes compliance. Obviously, as external audit have said, we do require now some additional sampling from previous years to test that assurance, but you know, just to assure committee that all the work and information that's been asked for by Derby Homes has been dealt with.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions for external audit? Thank you for your update and your attendance. If there are no more questions on the audit annual governance statement introduced as a late item, then we can move on. Are we happy to move on? Of course. Thank you. So we don't need a vote on this, but if there are any objections, please let me know. The recommendations of the report then to go through them one at a time. There are three: to review and approve the annual governance statement 2023-23, 22-23 at Appendix 1. You all had a copy. To delegate the Director of Corporate Management to make any necessary changes following review by external audit and the date of publication of the annual accounts, further to them being auditors. We've already discussed that. Yeah. And to request that the leader of the council and the chief executive sign the certification at the end of the annual governance statement of publication alongside the statement of accounts. Thank you. On that resolution, then, we will move on to item number 5 on the agenda, which is outstanding resolutions. Do you have a report?
I'll pick that one up, Chair, if I can. Just refer members to Appendix 1. I won't go into too much detail. A lot of the things, as you can see there, have sorted themselves out. Two things I wanted to pick up on. One was both of them from last time's meeting on the 26th of July. There was the item where myself and Alison were asked to look at mandatory e-learning for fraud awareness. What I have found, I don't know how I managed to come across it, but there is actually a money laundering course on the council's e-learning, which I've now done and passed, surprisingly enough. But it's not mandatory and it's not well publicised. So I don't know how many people actually know it's there. But Alison and myself are currently exploring what other e-learning packages are out there to look at fraud in the much bigger picture rather than just money laundering. So it's something we will bring back to committee in the future once we've got some costs and stuff. I'm currently in chat with a firm that provides us with the e-learning to see what they can do on fraud for us. And the other one was about that Councillor Wright raised about suspicious activity reports, which was an interesting question because in the fraud report we said there hadn't been any in the last year, and I responded back to Councillor Wright by email to say in the last 5 years we've only had 2 SARS that we've had to report, which, as Councillor Wright has pointed out, is rather low for an organisation of this size. One of the things that we are looking at is how everybody works together. One of the things that could be happening is that we use banks a lot to get the information, and it could be them that are actually putting the SARS SARS referrals through to the National Crime Agency. But I need to have a chat with the financial investigator in trading standards as well to see what her role is in all these things. And again, something that we'll need to look at and report back to committee on how that system is working, because clearly at the moment we're not sure exactly what's happening to the SARS. Normally they should come through to me for me to report onto the NCA website, but I've only had 2 in the last 5 years. Okay, thanks.
A quick thought that we say AML training is not mandatory, not for any element of the council, not for elements handling cash on a daily basis.
No, it's not down, Chair, as one of the mandatory courses. It's on there as a course that people can do if they can find it, but it's not a mandatory course. And what Arsenal are looking at is now having to see what we can do that can, we could roll out as a mandatory course to all staff and members.
My first thought would be that the lack of suspicious activity requests might be because of the lack of training. But that's just one thought. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that point. Is that the same across all councils then, where that's not mandatory?
I can comment on Derby and other councils that CMAP audit, but it's not widespread to my knowledge. But the way people tackle fraud training varies across councils. In a lot of cases, fraud training is given direct to people, but not via e-learning. But it's something we need to have a look at. I'm more concerned with how we're presenting it to Derby, so it's something that we will be looking at, and e-learning method is one of the key ways of doing that.
Okay, thanks. I'll leave you to look into it. I mean, from my understanding, with elements of the council being regulated, I would have thought it was mandated by regulation, but I'll leave that with you to explore and come back with a response. Are there any other questions?
Chair.
Councillor Wright.
Yeah, it was just this issue I don't think is a City Council issue, although I think all the points made about training as a pertinent, people get more awareness of fraud and can look for it more actively. This is really an issue of other organisations, banks, solicitors, providing information to actually feed back to the council that there's suspicious transactions. And 2 reports in 5 years for an organisation of this size and the number of transactions that go through on a daily basis seem to me ridiculously low. Now, that might be because Derby City Council is so efficient that all the transactions aren't subject to fraud, but I think that's probably an unlikely explanation. I think the explanation more likely is the reports aren't getting us through to us from the relevant organisations. So while I applaud all the we need to train internally, I think if we could find out what the issue is, if there is an issue, there may not be an issue, but it sounds as though there's lack of suspicious activity, suspicious in itself. So, I think it's Richard's going down exactly the right direction. Why aren't we getting these reports?
Thanks, Councillor Wright. It's a long been opinion of mine as well. No reports suggest a problem. Yeah, but you're on with that exploration activity anyway. Do you have a timescale for the exploration?
I'm currently talking with the head of the regulatory services to get a meeting set up with the finance investigator in his department, and then we can take it from there. Also involve our counter fraud team as well, and also legal.
Okay, a number of stakeholders.
It could be 6 months or so.
Take some time. Okay, thank you. Is there a risk accept in play over this?
There's always a risk around it, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, Mr. Sunderland?
Just a quickie on the thing about training for councillors in Doris and things. Can you make sure that independent members are included in any training arrangements? That's all. Whenever that takes place, whatever the training happens to be, whether it's Doris or anything, that's all.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, I saw an email about some training, and I've lost track of where we're up to. Is that being planned?
Yeah, we're looking at some dates. Sorry, yeah, we're still looking at dates for that, but as soon as I have some, I'll share that with members and get it set up. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on that standing resolutions? Thank you. We'll move on. The next item on this agenda then is Annistree Hall. We have a report to be presented, and in a very unusual set of circumstances, we have a member of the public who'd like to speak strictly in relation to the report, I think with a maximum time limit of 3 minutes. And then we'll take questions. Who has the report for this?
I'll kick it off, Chair. Just to introduce, committee will know Martin Shipley, the Group Auditor. He picked up that he was the lead for the investigation, and the auditor with him today, Susanna Lesk, was the auditor that did the work. I'm going to leave it to Martin to go through the report with you. I'm not going to say any more on that, but Martin will pick it all up.
Thank you. I'll provide some brief background initially to this, because there's a fair few people on the committee now that weren't on this when it was originally scoped and put together. The sale of Annistree Hall was agreed by Council Cabinet in September 2019. Annistree Golf Course was closed in December 2020 following an unsuccessful expressions of interest exercise to identify a new operator for the facility. Issues relating to Annistree Hall, Park and Golf Course were subsequently raised by campaign groups and individuals, one of which is here tonight. Discussion of these matters took place at full council in July 21. There were further discussions at Executive Scrutiny Board in September of that year, 2021, and this was raised again in the January meeting 2023. Subsequently, it was referred on to the Audit and Governance Committee, and in March 23, CMAP were formally requested to carry out an investigation into a number of objectives. The 3 objectives which were requested to investigate were the Council's engagement with English Heritage Assessment for the golf course to become a heritage asset, and the completion of the Heritage Impact Assessment followed due process, whether the removal of damage to trees at Annistree Golf Park constituted a criminal offence, and was a competitive process carried out for the sale of Annistree Hall and Golf Course, and was adequate due diligence undertaken to ensure that the process provided a value for money outcome for the Council. Through our investigation, these 12 pages of detailed findings. We've gone through the findings with Philip Sutherland, the co-opted member that's here today. We've reviewed the field work together and the findings together, and put the report, which is in front of you today, together accordingly. I do not propose to go through the 12 pages of findings in detail. They're there. I expect you who have already read them or to read them in due course. What I'll do is go straight to the conclusions, which are on page 17 of the report. We found that council officers responded promptly and helpfully to English Heritage in reference to the matter of the council's engagement with English Heritage in the assessment for the golf course to be included on the register of parks and gardens of special historic interest. English Heritage concluded that further research on a national scale would be required to determine whether the golf course should be included on the register or not. In reference to the matter of whether completion of the Heritage Impact Assessment followed due process, we reviewed the various impact assessments completed, the national planning framework along with the local plan and other guidance and documentation available. We found no concerns with the Heritage Impact Assessment, which was completed in line with the guidance and was produced by appropriate qualified persons. In reference to the matter of removal of damage to trees at Annistree Park, prior to our investigation, the council had already taken appropriate legal advice in determining whether the works were in breach of the tree preservation order or not. Having determined that the works were in breach, the council had already acknowledged this and taken appropriate mitigating actions. Having reviewed the governance arrangements in place and the guidance available, we concur that this approach was appropriate under the circumstances, in line with that which the council should have followed. Evidence we reviewed demonstrated that a competitive process was carried out for the sale of the hall. We confirmed that adequate due diligence was undertaken and that the process did provide a value for money outcome for the council. In reference to the matter of the sale of Annistree Golf Course, we confirmed that a competitive process with clearly defined criteria to evaluate the bids did take place. Since no bids met this criteria, the decision to close the golf course was subsequently taken in line with the delegated authority conferred by Council Cabinet.
Through the investigation, we also identified four potential areas for recommendation. We put these recommendations to the respective council departments, and these have been specified at 3.3. First of all, first one concerned terms of reference for the governance arrangements for the rewilding project with Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. I'm pleased to tell this committee that these arrangements are now in place and have been duly ratified. There was a second recommendation advising that procurement processes used by Wildlife Trust are considered in partnership with the council. This has since been addressed through the creation of a project board who ensure that procurement processes in place satisfy all partners on the project. Next, we advised that consideration is given to documenting the tree preservation enforcement policy and associated procedures. This is being considered for adoption by the council. The date's May 26, as this needs to be taken into consideration and time with the council's local plan. And lastly, that consideration is given to the inclusion of Aller Street golf course in the local heritage assets. The responsible officer for this one has accepted the risk and stated that this was extensively reviewed several years ago and they are satisfied that the process was robust. That concludes what I want to go through with respect to the presentation. Any questions?
Okay, thank you for that. Before we do hear Mr. Picken, who's been given the opportunity to speak briefly today on matters strictly relating to that report, do any members have any questions? Councillor Wright.
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair. It appears, first of all, I think it was a very well put together report and very clear and you know, very well investigated report. So I'd like that to recognise. The second issue is that there appears to be a breakdown of communication and oversight between Derbyshire Wildlife and the council, and I appreciate it's early in the process, but it appears from the report they don't seem to up to managing a site of this big, and not managing it, but understanding what the council's priorities are, and the council having some oversight on what they're doing there. And a good issue is a good example of that is this issue with the appointing different the wrong contractors to do or contractors without the relevant expertise to do the work. And what I'm concerned about, and anticipating this may well be a long-term relationship, that we have the proper oversight, because obviously it's a really important asset to the residents of Derby, and we need to make sure Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, which I understand from my own experience is largely a lot of volunteer support within that organisation, and whether they've got the robust governance or you know, in place to actually manage the site on our behalf.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Wright. So the query there being more about the ongoing management, it might well be something we can include in our remit going forward.
I can pick it up simply to say that the two recommendations which we put forward as part of the investigation, the first one concerned putting the terms of reference in place between the council and the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, which is now in place to sort of formalise that agreement and to formalise those arrangements. And secondly was that there's now a project board in place which has been created since these matters occurred to obviously oversee the project planning and procurement process and everything along those lines. So hopefully now with the implementation of both of those recommendations, the process should be a lot better going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So is there a scope to provisionally, well, much further down the line, put an audit in play or when there's further activity?
Not presently, but that is something that can be put in the indicative audit plan for the future. That's not a problem at all, Chair.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. And I'd start by saying that, yes, I'm a member of Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, but because they have such large membership, they also do have a lot of professional employees, and that's a growing number of people. So I think Derbyshire Wildlife Trust should be capable of managing the site. Whether they've been given the right remit or not, I think is more my concern, given that the heritage assessment was done before some of the information about the historic nature of the design and the land actually came to light, I'm actually more concerned about the risk, the officers considering that the local heritage asset doesn't need to be reviewed at this point. Because I just wonder if that is something that we should be doing or we should be encouraging to happen in some way.
Perhaps then we could make a recommendation that the heritage assessment is carried out again in light of the time that's passed.
Potentially, Chair, yes.
We're not going to do a vote, but is everybody in favour or anybody against? Let's resolve then to make a recommendation that we reconduct the heritage assessment, or the heritage assessment is reconducted in view of the amount of time that's passed. Thank you. Sorry, I can't see your name either, but by all means.
Oh, it's David Webster, one of the new co-opted members. Just a question about the tree protection enforcement policy. The action and the response is to just consider whether to have that policy or not, and the timescale is not until May 2026. Is that consideration enough, and is that timescale short enough?
Are you able to answer?
I think that question probably ought to be directed towards the head of service rather than ourselves, because obviously we can't answer that one. It's obviously what's practical with respect to capacity within the section.
Thanks. So again, we're accepting the report as it is, but can we raise the question for the head of service? Thank you. Are there any other questions on the findings of the report? I mean, this largely concludes the matter. The exercise appears to have been successfully discharged with recommendations made, so it does largely conclude the matter. We do have with us, though, Mr. Picken, who would like to speak. We've got a restriction of 3 minutes on this, and I politely request that your passion is noted, but if we can try and keep the representations strictly relating to the report at hand, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
It's very useful to have the opportunity to see the stopwatch, because I do tend to rabble on because of the interest and obsession I've got with this. Can I just say that I really welcome the fact that this site has now been recognised as listed as a local heritage asset. I would argue against the report and saying that the heritage assessment was fit for purpose in December 2019. However, that is now part of history. It is certainly not fit for purpose currently, and the motion that's just been put forward and agreed by yourself is an important one in order to protect the site and also to protect the City Council, so I would welcome that and thank you for your efforts. I am a little concerned in relation to the decision that's been allowed by the Tree Preservation Officer, who has given retrospective permission for offences to have been committed when that doesn't appear to have been supported by legislation. There's nothing in law that allows him to do that. The fact that the people who had committed those offences are the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, Derby City Council, that is an issue of concern for me. I am a member of the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust as well. I very much am a supporter of environmental and sustainable practice. The golf course is of incredible historic importance. The reason that my application for it to be listed failed was that, as listed within the report, they wanted to make comparisons because it was thought it was the only golf course in the United Kingdom that had ever had an application made. Subsequent research proved Historic England to be wrong, in that there were 2 golf courses already listed and protected in Scotland, Glen Eagles and St Andrews. That should give you an indication of how important this site is from a purely golfing perspective. My research now has actually revealed that the designed landscape and setting around Alistry Hall and the parks and gardens that came before it are arguably more important than the golf course history. That's why it is so important to have an up-to-date assessment of what that has to offer. At Derby Arena at Christmas, you're going to be having a pantomime Mother Goose. This is a potential golden egg for the city. This has attracted global interest around the world from purely golfing circles. The other history, I've now managed to link it to Heaton Park in Manchester. Heaton Park in Manchester is not within a World Heritage Site buffer zone, but it successfully attracted £12 million of grant funding to renovate the park. It has an identical history to Alistry Park. The question was asked about opportunities. This is a massive opportunity for the council. And I've now got 3 seconds left. And bearing in mind, I've actually written this as I've sat because I wasn't expected to be able to make a presentation here. It's a little garbled. The main thing is that the heritage assessment has to be fit for purpose now. You can't rely on the old one. Thank you for being given the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Good points, and your points are noted. Thank you. On the and will be taken into account for the recommendation that will go forward.
Is this the point where the crook disappears me out?
You're welcome to stay if you like. We've got an area you can attend upstairs. In light of the comments, does anybody have any further comments or questions? Okay. Thanks everyone then. Moving on to item number 7 on this agenda. We've got the Audit and Governance Committee updated committee work programme 2023-24. Do you have a report, Richard?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is just bringing through a revised programme to pick up on a couple of things. I mean, the original programme you hadn't got the Alistry Hall and Golf Course investigation report down for today's meeting. I've also added in, having chatted to Alison, a couple of items for the 6th of December, being the SIP for Financial Management Code, an update on that. And Alison also wants to bring an update on the new financial management system, CIA as it's called, for those. Again, we still haven't got any, excuse me, any scheduled reports from external auditors we've heard earlier. We're not quite sure when they're going to arrive, so they just remain as yet to be listed. It's really just to bring members up to speed with additional reports that will be brought to future meetings.
Thanks, Richard. The interesting point for me is how we respond if there is a decision that those audits are risk accepted rather than fully discharged. I'm not sure we can answer that right now. Does anybody else have a question? Councillor Kerr.
The way this is presented to us is as an annual work programme with the historic bits greyed out, which is fine, and I think it was really appropriate when we were having elections almost every year. But in terms of the internal audit work programme, we've learnt that it's actually useful to have it as a rolling programme of work and to make it more flexible. And we've already had in today's meeting the suggestion that we should be looking at data breaches at some point in the future. And I wondered whether we ought to be asking for this as a proposed 12-month rolling forward. We can still see the previous 3 months, but a 12-month rolling forward programme rather than seeing things fall off the end. And obviously we have an annual meeting in May, or possibly slightly earlier this year because we haven't got the elections. And that might change the makeup of the committee, but we'd still have a rolling programme that the new committee could inherit. And I just wondered whether that was something that we might sort of align our workings with the way internal audit works and with the way the council is now working.
Well, first of all, I'm seeing a nod.
Yeah, that's not a problem at all, Councillor Kerr. We can do a rolling programme on this. It's pretty much similar each year because we'd expect reports coming through at certain times. So just to keep rolling it on as we do with the internal audit plan is not a problem for me.
Anybody have any concerns about the change in approach? Let's resolve to change the approach. Thank you. Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, I support that. Councillor Kerr's it's a really good recommendation. And just talking about that rolling programme, I'm particularly concerned about Section 106 processes, and I've been informed this morning it was last reviewed in October 21. So, you know, I'm not sure whether this is an appropriate place in the agenda, but talking about new issues that ought to come in and you know, be on the list of priorities. I'd like that to be considered, please.
Yeah, I think it's a nice, appropriate point, and hopefully that won't open a floodgate, but it is an appropriate point. Is that something we can include in the plan?
It is, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the committee can, whenever they want, ask for certain things to be brought before them. So rather than it go in the audit plan as an audit, if the committee want to look at Section 106 as an item for the committee, then so be it. It can be brought into the plan, into the work programme.
If I understand right, then it already exists as information. So rather than auditing it, we can present the information.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that all? Does that satisfy your query?
No, it wasn't. I mean, the last report is going to be forward, so I can look at it for background information. It really is about how it's implemented at the moment.
Councillor Kerr.
As planning committee members were given a presentation on the way in which the Section 106 process is working, and encouraged to get ourselves and our colleagues to participate in that. And I think a similar presentation would actually be helpful to this as well as a starting point for that. Then we could take it on with a bit more knowledge.
Is that rather than create a new version, is that something we can just ask for oversight of?
I think we'd need an officer to present it, but we can ask the head of planning to facilitate that, I would think, for our next meeting or meeting after.
Chair, what you need to just do is to, unless Dom corrects me on this one, we've done this in the past where we've had sessions where someone comes along and addresses the committee because the committee have got concerns about something. So as Councillor Kerr said, you invite along the head of service or someone like that to do a presentation to you on Section 106 so you can see how it all fits together and how it works within the authority.
Seems like a sensible approach. Are we all in favour?
Yeah, can I just, one other suggestion then, if we are going to do that, which I think is a really good idea, for the reasons that Lucy stated, could we have somebody, invite somebody, for example, from the relevant government department, assuming it's levelling up, to actually give us a view in terms of whether whether our implementation and procedures are as Parliament envisaged they would be, and how we compare with other local authorities, to give us an external view of things. Because my issue really isn't, it's really can we implement it in different ways so it benefits the residents of Derby better, in my opinion. So it's not really about, it's more about, is this what Parliament was looking to for the Act to, that section of the Act to actually be implemented, or are we doing it a different way? Can we do it better?
There's no harm in asking the question, making the invitation. The remit. So first things first, are we all in favour of the idea of a report presented by the relevant member of the team to discuss Section 106? Are there any concerns about that? Okay, that's one thing. And then the second thing, inviting a member of central government, I'm just not sure that falls into our remit unless we're looking backward. Councillor, we can.
Sorry, Chair. We can invite them to attend. There's obviously no guarantee that they'll come, but we can put out the invitation to come to that meeting.
Let's invite them to attend. In the event that they do attend, we may be able to make some recommendations. Councillor Kerr.
I was going to suggest that we could, that there are changes that have been made and are afoot in the way in which planning gain is managed, and we should be able to have those options explained to us and the way it works explained to us by our staff. And we also have the legal side as well. We could ask the legal officer who deals with planning to come in with that wider view. And the other route I would have looked at was whether the Local Government Association have provided any guidance or best practice and they may provide something that's more specific that may be useful to us.
Thank you. I do think there's some merit here, and the theme from both councillors is that there's perhaps an appetite to review decisions that have been made in the past against government frameworks. Is there any scope to put something like that in the audit plan?
It's not something I would have considered. But, Martin's got a view on it, so I'll let Martin have.
To be fair, I think I'd already made a note that we can put section 106 in indicative audit in the plan for be picking up in one of the future quarters. It is an audit that we do across the partnership. It is an audit that we've got some expertise within the team, and people have undertaken it on a number of occasions at different places, as here back in 2021. We can certainly perform that audit. We can redo it obviously with later samples to obviously see how the situation is now, and obviously provide an updated situation to this committee in due course. That's probably the best approach with this, but obviously you'd have to wait the next quarter and for the audit to obviously be conducted before we can come back to this committee. Thank you.
Just for clarity then, the scope of that audit would be to ensure that decisions made in respect of section 106 are consistent with government framework and guidance.
The scopes of audits are normally identified at the point of commencing the engagement. So we'd put it as a headline in the plan for a section 106 audit, and at the point of commencing that audit, that's when the scope would be put together for exactly what we review. Because with the best will in the world, if we agree what a scope will be now, in a couple of months, 3-4 months down the line, that may be entirely different. So we usually scope right at the start of each engagement. Happy to consult the councillor at that point and obviously get his opinion to what he wants us to look at in conjunction with the officers of that service. Okay, so if this is as proposed, if that goes into the plan as proposed as a headline for now, subject to further agreement down the line, does that satisfy Councillor Wright, Councillor Kerr? Anybody, any reservations or concerns, Mr. Sunderland? So, sorry, I'll just move on to something slightly different. Obviously, the large number of activities not scheduled as yet, the majority of those are down to EY for various reasons, as we've heard. I would have thought that for every meeting we ought to have a standing item of external audit and the update position in relation to every year which is outstanding and every issue. So in addition to all the things we've already got on the programme for each audit, we ought to have an external audit report for every meeting anyway, because things are just, well, nothing's happening basically from our point of view. Whether the issue of the tax that has been referred to, whether it's a material item or not, I don't know, because obviously I'm not aware of it, but it was one of the questions we might want to ask at the time. So I think it wouldn't be unreasonable to ask for every meeting to have somebody from external audit to do a written report or a report on exactly where they are on every year's accounts and every part of the audit which they're in, which they're required to address. And I think that would not be an unreasonable request to put forward. So I just thoughts of members, but. So I'm in agreement. We're lucky that we do regularly have attendance from external audit. Well, we don't always, because sometimes this is the first time we've had somebody for a while. But anyway, carry on. Yeah, so we are lucky to occasionally have the attendance of external auditors. But I think the inclusion of that item as a standard agenda item is entirely reasonable, and to expect an update on a regular basis would be reasonable as well.
I think that's doable. We can take that away.
Thanks. Are there any other matters to raise on the work programme? Okay. Moving on then to item 8, which is the internal audit progress report.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I won't dwell too long on this. We don't normally bring an update to the October meeting, but we have issued quite a few reports, more than normal in the period, so a report has come through. One thing I will say is that progress, and it's not just at Derby, I'm seeing this across the partnership that we work across, the progress on audits is slowing down, not from an internal audit point of view, but us getting buy-in from those we're auditing. We're finding it more and more now that there are delays because we're not getting the information we require. We can't get to see people as much as what we used to. And I think a lot of it is down to the pressures that people are under, the amount of work they've got. And as I said, it's not just at Derby, it's across the partnership we're seeing this. The other thing I'd say as well is one of the things we've been working on is getting the number of recommendations down, and you'll as I reported last time, you'll see that the risk accepted recommendations, we've got a few more of those again that are coming later on the agenda. Trying to get the number of recommendations down. There's a performance indicator that the council have got of the number of internal audit recommendations that are now 6 months past their original target date. The target was to get that down. It has been up around the 50 and 60 mark and higher than that over the last couple of years. The aim was to hope to get that down to 30 by the 31st of March 2024. We've got it down. It came down to 40 at the last month, but when I've just done the September figures, we're back up around 49.50 again. There's more coming on board, and again, that's for the fact that people are not getting their not responding to us on where they are with recommendations, but also there are other things that they see as more pressing than dealing with internal audit and internal audit recommendations. But to move back onto the progress so far, we are getting there now. The one audit that I've mentioned a few times, the health and safety audit from 21-22, we've now got that to, it's showing here as draft report, that's now been issued. So we are moving certain things forward. So there are some areas that are still sticking points that we are trying to move forward. And again, it's down to getting cooperation from, I don't know this word, but from the auditees. To move on to the completed audit assignments, there are 7 showing on page 6. 2 of them substantial, 3 reasonable, and 2 where the type of audit is not one where we were given an assurance rating on. So nothing alarming coming out of those at all. In fact, it's good to see reasonable and substantial and no limiteds in there, and certainly no non-audits in there. Not a great deal that I would wish to draw to committee's attention in the actual outcomes of those audits. If we move on to recommendations, the one good point now is that we've got the number of certainly significant recommendations down. Now there's only the bereavement services one around the cremator that's outstanding. At the July meeting, Nigel Bryan came along and gave an update on the bus station, and we were able to remove those recommendations now because of the way things are moving there. Still a number of moderate risks that are over 6 months due. Again, as I was saying, we're still, the new revised target dates are being passed, and we're still not getting information coming through. What we are doing at the moment is every quarter we do a chasing of recommendations by sending out to all the service directors. These are lists of recommendations that are outstanding in your area, and to get them to put pressure on their managers to respond to us. And I've also got a date on the 31st of October to go to the corporate leadership team and do an update to the chief exec and the strategic directors and the service directors on where we're at with recommendations. And it's something that Paul, as chief exec, is very, very keen on. So hopefully that will spur a few more on with the fact that we'll be going to CLT on there. The only other thing I would like to draw your attention to is the QAP at the end. And in fact, I've added a new area into that, of being about we're in the process of purchasing and implementing a new audit management system for CMAP, and that's got to go live of the 1st of April 2024. And it's a big step for us. It's a lot of money, but hopefully it will bring benefits to CMAP as a whole. The system we've got at the moment is, we wrote internally, it's about well over 15 years old. It serves its purpose. It's a good system, and it served us well for that. But we're looking now at getting an off-the-shelf one, which we've got to configure, etc. So that's going to take a bit of time of our planned work as well, which overlaps into the next report. But again, that's something we will keep committee updated on as to how we're progressing with that new audit management system. one of the things I'm hoping for, of course, it will give us a real-time dashboards and stuff that we can bring to committee as well. That concludes what I wanted to say on the progress report, Chair.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you again, Audit team, for all your hard work, which often goes unthanked, and that's not right, but yeah, I appreciate the work you're doing. Just a quick thought before we open to questions. What's the escalation process in the event that a risk accept or a recommendation goes over its time limit?
What normally happens there is we have the current system that we've got keeps firing out emails to people to remind them to respond to us. The escalation process really is bringing it through to this committee, although we go via service directors and strategic directors to get their input and get their help on that. But where we feel that nothing's happening, it's raised with yourselves as a committee, and you have the option to call people in to find out why things are going over time. So that's an option that you have, that you can call people in and question them as to why recommendations aren't being implemented as quickly as they should be.
Is that manually triggered then?
Sorry, Chair?
That manually triggered, that invitation to committee?
Normally, I would advise the committees, I think this one needs to be called in. But again, if you see things in the report, it's your right to say, we're a bit unhappy that this recommendation is still outstanding. We want to get more detail on it.
I mean, I'm minded, unless there's any reservations from members, I'm minded to almost automate that process. And if a recommendation or a risk accept hits a certain trigger point, then it's an automatic invite to committee to justify the lack of action.
Certainly agree with you on significant and moderate risks. I think just agreeing a trigger point as to how long committee would consider going over even the revised date by. What would you consider as a date you wish to call people in?
Are you prepared to make a recommendation to the committee next month in terms of your thoughts on an automatic trigger for invitation?
Certainly can do, Chair, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Yeah, it's just a question on the removal from the plan. I note that you've taken out long-term waste management project from the plan. I assume that's because of the settlement, but it really doesn't answer the question about whether the long-term waste management process is fit for purpose and has been fit for purpose. So I suppose my question is it appropriate to bring it back in some other format to actually ask that question, or is it being dealt with in a different way?
I'll hand over to Martin, who leads on this.
You're quite right in your assumption of that's why the previous one's been removed from the plan at this stage. Obviously, there's no point in reviewing it further now that settlement's been reached. What we have actually done is the days which were assigned to that originally, we've not just took them out of the plan altogether. They've been assigned to a waste management audit. So you'll notice when we get to the Q3 audit planning report shortly, that there's now a waste management audit in the plan. What we're looking to do is put a scope together for that particular area and do a review in that area with the days that we've now took out of that. So yes, that's exactly what's happened.
Can I start with a thank you, because the audit dashboard is so much more legible than it's been in the past. And I know two things. Firstly, in terms of a trigger point for getting people in, I think it's actually it's nuanced, because in some cases you find that there are people scrabbling desperately to try and get something done, but they're held up because the software suppliers aren't doing it, or they can't do this, and there's a genuine reason, or there's another project that is holding things up, and you can get a narrative that is plausible, understandable, and you can agree with. And there are other times when there seems to be a lack of communication happening, and those are the ones that I think where we're not getting a dialogue happening with internal audit as to why this isn't being delivered. Those are the ones I think that we need to be putting pressure on. So I don't think it's a simple trigger point, but it is more nuanced. The other thing I was going to raise is that both here and in the the later reports, so many of the problems seem to be software related, that we're not getting progress, or we're not getting recommendations delivered because either the software provider hasn't got the resources, or they don't want to make the changes that we need, or we've got manual systems for data into two different systems. And I think there's actually a question underlying here, and I don't know whether it's something that we should be looking at, but it's how our data systems need to be working together. Now, I'm not an IT expert. Some people here may be. But I think it's to do with whether we have all the right skills for doing, I'm told the phrase is data architecture, to be able to manage our systems, and whether we have them in-house or whether we need people with additional skills or something. Have we got a gap here, which is why we're meeting these problems again and again?
Thank you. First of all, I'm sure officers will take your recommendations into account for trigger points or rules. Second of all, I probably should declare an interest. My main employment is in risk assessment and data architecture. So let's just have that on record in case anybody behind my back goes and appoints my firm. Thank you for that. Does anybody have any thoughts on assessing the adequacy of skills across the organisation in terms of architecture?
It's a big exercise, I would say. It's not something that I would want to take on.
That's all right.
I'm not sure whether it's a remit for this committee, because I'm yet to be fully au fait, but I would expect whoever's leads from an officer level, the IT governance, will have the current data architecture plan for the council. That person will know where the gaps are and issues in terms of interoperability, interconnectivity between different systems, and will no doubt have a plan in terms of how they want to fill that gap, whether it's internal provision, external, a mixture of both. You know, that's what we pay, or what the council pays for that individual to do, to have their finger on the pulse of that. So all the questions that Lucy's answered should be at the fingertips of the head of the relevant person, and I share Lucy's concerns. It's a bit opaque to me at the moment whether we're in a good place or in a bad place, but it seems from the internal audit there are continuing issues, and we've heard about some at the last meeting with external providers not supporting legacy systems, you know, so the evidence is already there. So my suggestion would be we get the head of service or the relevant person who looks after the IT infrastructure and for the city council to come and tell us what they think.
I think there's some merit. I think that the issue that we've got is the question would be very broad. But if we were able to collate the responses from people who are informing us that this is a challenge they're experiencing, then we can put those questions to the correct department. Is that something we could do? Wherever it's being positioned as a blocker, are we able to collate those responses and put them to the correct department?
It's certainly in the remit of the committee, yes. Because you want to find out why things aren't happening. It's all about governance, process and risk, so it's in your remit.
In the first instance, if we do some analysis to see if it's a significant, if there is a trend in the responses, then we could consider it further from there. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, just picking on point, in terms of the remit, would it also be in the remit of the Corporate Services and Cost of Living Committee as well?
Good point. Okay, but as the next step, then we'll see if there is any trend to deal with. Yes.
Thank you. Just a couple of points on the specifics, Richard, just as observations. So there's on page 14, there's the CCTV progress, where the audit was done in 2019. So we're now 4 years. Looking at the comment, we actually called that audit back a year ago and we're still open. So I wonder how good we are as a committee at following through with things being called in and making sure they're resolved. So if we call something back, we're a year in and we're still not got it fixed. So I think we need to be going through the conversation we just had and getting people in to perhaps talk to us more robust in how we hold people to account. And going back to one of Richard's earlier reports on the outstanding resolutions, the welfare reforms audit, we called that back 6 months ago, but there's no owner in the business, so we still haven't heard about it. Somebody somewhere must own this, and if they don't, surely it's down to the chief executive to appoint an owner so that we get the resolutions quicker.
If I pick up on the CCTV one first, yes, it is something that's been about some time. There's a lot of issues with this because there was no one, the CCTV provision within the council was not owned, was not the responsibility of one person, it was spread across several departments. And that's what caused a lot of the issues with this. And the main sticking point at the moment is that the department think that they've implemented this. They've sent the details through to the auditor saying, well, no, you haven't actually given me the information that I can sign this off as being implemented. There's still areas I've got concern. And so that's the sticking point at the moment, is waiting for that extra information from them before we can sign it off as implemented. So that's what the issue is with the CCTV. And I pick up what Tony's saying on the on committee following things through. Certainly on the bus station, that's come to committee several times, as has the bereavement services. So certainly on the significant risk recommendations, committee follow those through. But again, there are sort of areas where perhaps it should be picked up more, but you are very reliant on what you get told by the officers when they come to here. We have seen it in the past where officers have come along, said one thing, and the recommendation is still outstanding 6 months later because they've said this is what I'm intending to do. Committee have gone, okay, that's fine, and then they've still not delivered it. So again, there is perhaps, as you're saying, as well as introducing now this threshold for when all recommendations get called in, perhaps we ought to make sure we've got a proper follow-up process of when things have been called in to what that next action is as well. So we'll build that into the process as well. And the welfare reform one, that was an issue down to the then head of service has left. That's why we've been struggling to find out, and Dom has been trying to get someone to come along. But in the meantime, we spoke to the manager there, and they've actually implemented the recommendation. So there's a bit of communication breakdown, shall we say. But from my point of view, those have been implemented now, so there's no need to call them in.
Thanks, Richard. Just one final point on page 16 for me, which is IT controls. And it's probably only a moderate risk, but it's a year, nearly a year overdue. Sorry, it's out of date. But it's about personal and sensitive data being held on open drives and public drives. And any time where you talk about sensitive data, I get really twitchy. And I think we should be looking to get some assurance that whoever's looking at that particular audit deficiency is completing it. The due date was August. So I'm just really nervous about sensitive personal data being not secure.
It is an issue, but we will have service director coming along for items 12 and 13 anyway. So he'll be so that question could be raised with him at that point, if you so wish there.
Are there any other questions or comments on the progress report? Yeah.
Just a quick one on the street lighting. When does the contract run out? And I think there might be a couple of lines missing because the totals don't add up. Page 8. When does the contract run out?
Well, we don't know, Philip. We'll come back to you on that one. We'll have to need to find out.
I just wonder if the contract's going to run out at some stage. Obviously, there's some termination issues around ownership and everything else. And in a previous life, I had quite a lot to do with PFI schemes, and that was always going to be a bit of a risk. about the availability of information from when the contract was set up 25 years ago or whenever it was. Anyway, yeah. Sorry, Paul, Martin.
There is about 10 years ballpark left on it. We can come back to you with an exact date in due course. Yeah, yeah. And it's the planning for, obviously, the end, the termination.
Thank you. If there's no more comments or queries then on the progress report, that moves us to item 9 on the agenda, which is the internal audit plan 23-24, quarter 3.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, what I'll say is that you'll probably notice now over the quarter 3 and quarter 4 the number of audits that we're planning are dropping down. One of the reasons being that we're still struggling to get other audits that have been allocated completed. But also, one of the things I have mentioned is the fact that the City Council has reduced its contribution to CMAP. So the number of audits we do in the year will decrease to show for that. We've still got quite a few things that are going on that we do from throughout the year. But there are a number of areas, as you can see, that in the indicative part later on, that we've got planned again. Not all of those will get done, but they just keep rolling forward unless risks change. But what we do each time is I sit down with Hannah and Martin and we go through and have a look and say, well, which of these risks do we really need to have a look at? So that's how these progress from being indicative onto the audit plan. But what I would say is that there are areas that keep cropping up that we need to have a look at, that we'll add into the plan as I go from a horizon scanning. So some things will take couldn't even take a year to get onto the plan, but we need to make sure that we are covering the key risks. There's not a great deal I would draw your attention to in the plan. These are ones that we've lined up, agreed with respective management as well on what areas we're going to cover. Some, like Moorway Sports Village, we haven't covered before, so that's one we want to get done. And of course, there's the waste management one that Martin was alluding to a bit earlier. And funding arrangements for care as well as another key area for people services. What we're trying to do as well is to even out the coverage across the departments. We've done quite a bit in people services and in communities in place in the past few quarters. Chief Exec's Directorate always traditionally had more audits than others, so we're trying to cut that one down again. But there are a number of areas that we feel that warrant looking at in quarter 3, and they're the ones that we've put into the plan.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Thanks for your report. Moving on then to item 10 of this agenda, which is to exclude members of the press and public. Ron, in favour?
Sorry, Chair, I'll just read it out. So it's to consider a resolution to exclude the press and public during the consideration of the following items. Under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following items on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information.
Any objections to that very detailed? Okay.